The camera wasn't supposed to be there. That much became clear almost immediately after the footage started circulating. It was the kind of moment that powerful institutions spend enormous amounts of money and energy making sure never happens. The wrong conversation in the wrong place at the wrong time, captured by a lens that nobody thought to account for. In the age of carefully managed press conferences and pre-approved talking points and media relationships built on mutual convenience, these moments are supposed to be impossible. And yet, there it was. PGA Tour officials, men whose entire professional existence depends on controlling the narrative around professional golf, caught in an unguarded moment that revealed something the organization had been working very hard to keep out of the public conversation. What was said, what was shown, what the body language and the hushed urgency and the visible discomfort communicated to anyone watching closely enough, it told a story that no press release, no commissioner statement, no carefully worded official response has been able to fully walk back. Because you can unsay words, you can clarify positions, you can spin context, but you cannot unsee a moment of genuine institutional panic caught in real time on camera. And that is exactly what the golf world is still processing right now. If this is your first time here and you found this video because something in professional golf has caught your attention lately, something that feels wrong, something that doesn't quite add up, you're in the right place. This channel exists to go beneath the official statements, beneath the polished press conferences, beneath the version of events that powerful organizations want you to accept. Hit that subscribe button now, because what we're unpacking today is the kind of story that keeps developing, and you don't want to be catching up when the next layer surfaces. To understand the weight of what was captured on camera, you need to understand the environment that created it. The PGA Tour in 2025 is not the confident, dominant institution it projected itself as even 5 years ago. It is an organization under extraordinary internal pressure, financial pressure, political pressure, the specific kind of existential pressure that comes when the foundations you built your authority on begin to quietly shift beneath your feet. The LIV Golf situation, despite the public framework agreement and the optimistic language from both sides, remains unresolved in ways that matter enormously to the people inside the sport. The promised merger, the promised player equity, the promised unified global tour, these things exist largely as intentions rather than realities. And in the vacuum between intention and reality, doubt grows. Trust erodes. And people who are paid to maintain appearances start to feel the strain of maintaining them. That strain is what the cameras caught. Not a scandal in the traditional sense. No envelope of cash. No explicit rule violation. No single individual caught in an act of clear wrongdoing. What was caught was something more revealing and in some ways more damaging than any of those things. What was caught was the unfiltered reaction of people who believed they were unobserved, responding to a reality that their public statements had been carefully constructed to obscure. Let me take you to the moment itself, because the details matter here, and the details are what separate genuine journalism from speculation. At a recent tour event, one that should have been, by all external appearances, a routine week of professional golf, something happened behind the scenes that shifted the atmosphere among officials in a way that several people present noticed and later described. It began, as these things often do, with information. Specifically, with information that had not yet become public, but that those inside the tour's operational structure were already aware of. A decision had been made, or more precisely, a decision had been discovered, one that involved the relationship between the PGA Tour and Augusta National, and one that had significant implications for how the tour's authority and relevance would be perceived going forward. The officials who learned of this information first had a window of time, hours, perhaps a day, before it would reach the broader media. And it was during that window, in a corridor, near a media area that was believed to be clear of active cameras, that the exchange happened. The exchange that was caught. Voices low but urgent. Gestures that communicated something between frustration and alarm. A conversation that was clearly not meant for any audience whatsoever. And then the realization, gradual, visible on the faces of at least 2 individuals in the footage, that the area was not as private as believed. That a camera, positioned for a different purpose entirely, had been rolling the entire time. If you've ever watched someone realize in real time that they've been overheard saying exactly what they didn't want overheard, that specific, unmistakable cascade of recognition and recalibration, then you have some sense of what this footage shows. Tell me in the comments if you've ever worked somewhere and felt that same gap between what leadership says publicly and what you know is actually happening behind closed doors. Because I think more people understand this feeling than the tour realizes. The footage itself, once it began circulating among media contacts, and then eventually more broadly through social media channels, triggered a response from the tour that was revealing in its own right. Not because of what was said in the official response. The language was predictably measured, the kind of institutional non-denial denial that communications professionals are trained to produce, but because of how quickly it came. The speed of the response told you something. When organizations respond quickly to footage, it means the footage shows something they recognize immediately. Something that requires no internal debate about whether it matters. No deliberation about whether the public reaction will be significant. It means the people watching the footage from inside the organization felt the same thing the public felt when watching it, the uncomfortable recognition of truth. What followed was the predictable machinery of crisis management. Background briefings with friendly journalists. Carefully timed statements from players who could be relied upon to provide supportive quotes. A subtle but unmistakable shift in the messaging around several ongoing conversations within the sport. The machinery worked up to a point. It always does, up to a point. But the machinery of institutional image management has a fundamental flaw in the social media era, and that flaw is this. It is designed to contain stories, and stories in 2025 do not want to be contained. They want to be shared. They want to be analyzed. They want to be slowed down and screenshot and discussed in comment sections at 2 in the morning by people who care deeply about something and refuse to accept the sanitized version of events. And the golf world has no shortage of those people. Here is what makes this moment specifically significant beyond the immediate drama of the footage itself. The PGA Tour has staked an enormous amount of its current credibility on a particular narrative, the narrative of competent, principled leadership navigating an extraordinarily difficult period in the sport's history. Commissioner Jay Monahan has given interviews. He has stood at podiums. He has used the language of vision and stability and the long game, with the practiced conviction of someone who needs that story to be believed not just by the public, but by the players whose continued loyalty the tour depends on. That narrative requires a specific ingredient to function. It requires the appearance of control, not actual total control. Everyone understands that the current situation is complicated and that some turbulence is inevitable. But the appearance of knowing what you're doing, the appearance of being the adults in a room full of competing interests, holding things together through competence and foresight. What the camera footage undermined, regardless of what specifically was said or what specific decision was being reacted to, was precisely that appearance. Because panic, even quiet and brief and quickly recovered from, is the opposite of the appearance of control. And once people see it, they cannot unsee it. Players see it. Agents see it. Sponsors, who are among the most sensitivity-attuned audiences in all of professional sports, see it. And they file it away. They update their assessment of the institution they're in relationship with. They ask themselves, quietly, whether the story they've been told about stability and vision and the long game is the story that's actually being lived inside those corridors. Let's talk about the players, because they are, ultimately, the heartbeat of this story. Not the officials, not the institutions. The human beings who dedicate their lives to mastering one of the most difficult and beautiful sports ever invented, who wake up before dawn and work through pain and pressure and the specific psychological brutality of a sport where the margin between triumph and obscurity is measured in fractions of inches over 4 days. These men, and increasingly the women whose tours are navigating their own version of these structural upheavals, deserve better than what professional golf has given them institutionally over the past several years. The ones who stayed loyal to the tour when LIV came calling did so, many of them, because they believed in the institution, because they were told, explicitly and implicitly, that loyalty would be honored, that the framework agreement would deliver real change, that the people in charge knew what they were doing and were doing it with the players' best interests genuinely at heart. And now, watching footage of those same people in moments of unguarded institutional alarm, some of those players are asking themselves the question that loyalty always eventually forces upon you. Was it worth it? not in terms of money, though that calculation has its own complicated weight, but in terms of something more personal, in terms of trust, in terms of whether the people you believed in deserved the belief you gave them. If you've ever been loyal to something only to find out the people running it were less certain than they appeared, you already know how heavy that question feels, and you already know that it deserves to be asked out loud. The broader golf media's response to the footage has itself been a story worth examining, because the coverage has been, with some notable exceptions, cautious in a way that tells you something about the ecosystem of relationships between the tour and the outlets that cover it. Access journalism, the practice of maintaining relationships with powerful institutions in exchange for the exclusive interviews and insider information that drive traffic and ratings, creates a structural disincentive to cover those institutions too aggressively. This is not a new observation. It applies to political journalism, to business journalism, to entertainment journalism. But in the relatively small and historically relationship-driven world of golf media, it applies with particular force. The result is that much of the official coverage of the footage has been framed in ways that minimize its significance, that provide the tour's official context as though that context is neutral rather than self-interested, that treat the moment as an isolated incident rather than as a data point in a larger pattern of institutional behavior that deserves sustained scrutiny. Independent voices, the podcasters, the YouTube channels, the writers who operate outside the access-dependent ecosystem, have told a different story, a more complete story, which is part of why you're here, and part of why the conversation that happens in spaces like this one matters as much as it does. The question of who gets to tell the story of professional golf, and whose interest that story serves, is one that the sport has been slow to fully reckon with, and the footage we're discussing today has made that reckoning harder to avoid. What does Augusta National make of all this? That question, more than almost any other in professional golf right now, feels like the one that actually determines what happens next. Because Augusta, as we've discussed before on this channel, is the fixed point around which everything else in the sport must orient itself. And Augusta's orientation toward the current PGA Tour leadership, toward the ongoing merger drama, toward the broader political landscape of professional golf, is something that the organization communicates only through action, never through statement, never through press release, never through the kind of managed messaging that the tour deploys constantly. What Augusta's recent actions have communicated is a studied, deliberate independence that reads, if you know how to read it, as something between impatience and quiet contempt. The Masters will be the Masters. It will invite who it decides to invite. It will structure its field according to criteria it determines. It will not wait for the PGA Tour's internal dramas to resolve themselves before making decisions that serve the tournament's long-term interests. And that posture, calm, unhurried, supremely confident, is the most devastating possible contrast to the image of tour officials caught in a moment of visible institutional panic. One organization knows exactly what it is and has no anxiety about its place in the world. The other is working very hard to project that same certainty while the cameras catch the moments when the projection slips. Here is where we arrive at the question that all of this is really about. Not the footage specifically. Not the officials caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Not even the particular decision or piece of information that triggered the reaction captured on camera. The real question, the one underneath all the drama and the institutional politics and the media narrative management, is whether professional golf is being led by people who are honest with themselves about the moment they're in. Because the most dangerous thing in any institutional crisis is not the crisis itself. It is the gap between the internal reality and the external performance. When leaders know things are more fragile than they appear and choose to maintain the performance anyway, when they manage appearances rather than manage problems, they are making a bet that the performance will hold long enough for the underlying reality to improve. Sometimes that bet pays off. History is full of institutions that papered over genuine structural problems long enough to actually solve them. But history is equally full of institutions where the gap between performance and reality became its own catastrophic problem, where the energy spent maintaining appearances was energy not spent solving the actual underlying issues, where by the time the performance finally failed, the underlying problems had grown so large that no amount of genuine leadership could have addressed them in time. The footage that was caught on camera did not create that gap for the PGA Tour. The gap existed long before any lens captured any unguarded moment in any corridor. What the footage did was make the gap visible. And now that it's visible, the question of how leadership responds, whether with renewed honesty or with doubled-down performance management, will tell us more about the future of professional golf than any press conference or framework agreement announcement ever could. There is still a path forward. Let's be clear about that, because the point of telling this story isn't despair. It isn't cynicism dressed up as journalism. The point is accountability, and accountability only matters if it leads somewhere. The PGA Tour could choose this moment of exposed vulnerability, of caught-on-camera honesty about the pressure they're under, as the starting point for a different kind of leadership. One that admits complexity instead of performing certainty. One that talks to players as partners rather than managing them as assets. One that engages with Augusta, with LIV, with the broader global golf landscape from a position of genuine strategic clarity rather than reactive crisis management. The players deserve that. The fans who have stayed loyal to this sport through years of confusing and exhausting institutional drama deserve that. The game itself, beautiful, maddening, irreplaceable, deserves that. Whether the people currently holding institutional power in professional golf are capable of delivering it is the open question. The footage suggests that behind closed doors, they are more aware of their own limitations than their public statements indicate. The question is whether that awareness ever translates into the kind of honest, humble, genuinely accountable leadership that the moment is asking for. That question doesn't have an answer yet, but it will. And when it does, this channel will be here to tell you exactly what that answer looks like, and what it means for a sport that, despite everything, millions of people around the world still love with a depth and a devotion that it has not always earned, but has somehow always kept. If that kind of storytelling matters to you, if you believe that the sports you love deserve honest examination, not just celebration, then you already know where to find us next time this story moves.